Not too long ago, I was part of a team trying to negotiate a labor agreement with a big developer in the city. And the developer was resisting the standard that the Build organization had set in Port Covington, which said that all projects receiving substantial city subsidy be required to hit an on-site requirement of 30% local workers. We saw it as a win-win for everyone, especially since this particular developer had already exceeded 30% on one of his projects and had come close to that number on two others. After some back and forth, I confessed my confusion. "I don't understand," I said to him. "It appears to me that hitting the 30% requirement would not be much of a problem for you, as your own numbers have shown. I don't understand why you don't just repeat whatever you did last time to make that happen." "You're right," he said. "I believe I could do way more than 30%. I just don't think I should have to." I think his own team was more shocked than we were to discover that their boss would risk advancing his own project driven by his own sense of righteousness. I've seen it happen on my side of these kinds of negotiations as well. Once, when plotting a strategy to work with and, if need be, pressure a mayor to deliver more for the community, I kept feeling that one of our leaders was positioning us to punish rather than to win. Finally, I said to him, "I'm upset about the mayor has handled this as well. I think it was wrong, but now we have a chance to make it right, and I'm wondering, would winning that for our people satisfy you, or is it important to you that we just punish the mayor?" He paused thoughtfully and confessed, "I'm not sure. I'll have to think about that." I know how he felt because I have struggled with similar feelings myself. Jesus tells this parable to those who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. That is, he told this to people who thought they were better than others in their thoughts, beliefs, behaviors, or attitudes. It's easy to see a multitude of examples of that kind of self-righteousness blinding others from doing what is right. Most of us have been on each side of that equation at different points in our lives. But the hard part, I think, about this parable that Jesus tells us is that the Pharisee was better than the tax collector according to every measure of the time. The Pharisee did fulfill, even exceed his covenantal obligations with God. The tax collector was a cog in the wheel of the imperial machine that extracted taxes from peasants to fill the pockets of the wealthy elites in Jerusalem, but mostly in Rome. And yet, Jesus teaches the Pharisee didn't go home in right relationship with God. The tax collector did. Because that tax collector was aware of and honest about his own need for grace. It's really important to see that Jesus does not say that the past actions of the tax collector are good or righteous, nor does he say that fasting or giving and sharing undertaken by the Pharisee, that these things are unimportant. No, he says rather that God is always ready to work with people who know that they need God's love and forgiveness and power in our lives in order to be made whole. Whatever you have done in the past does not have to remain an obstacle to your relationship with God in the present. God is ready to love and forgive. But if you do not think that you need love or grace or forgiveness or help in your life to be made whole, the text argues, then there is no real room for God. A member of our Wednesday morning Bible study class made the point this week that we all have times when we are more like the Pharisee than the tax collector, and other times when we're more like the tax collector than the Pharisee. Sometimes we are acutely aware of our needs. Other times we feel we are above it all. I don't think Jesus has in mind trying to make us more like the tax collector as much as he wishes to describe what the world looks like, what the kingdom of God, as he calls it, looks like, what it looks like when people are aware of their need for grace, adopting an open posture for God and others, instead of the self-sufficient, need no one stance taken by the Pharisee. Creating that kind of world has been at the center of both of our educational events recently. The Diversity Committee led us in conversations about what it looks like to create a church where disability is not a stigma that isolates a few from many, but another difference that adds to our collective communal experience, even when those differences are difficult to adapt to as an individual, the community, or both. And Dr. Dan Hale has been reminding us that depression is not a taboo topic to be whispered about or gritted through alone, but a condition that can be treated. And that treatment can be supported by a community that talks about depression openly, as a person would discuss their back pain that's been flaring up or their cancer treatment that has been making them tired. I've been reflecting myself on what it means to destigmatize not just disabilities, not just mental health conditions, but destigmatize need itself. Accepting the reality that every human being has a need not only for food, water, and shelter, but also a need for connection, for love, and community. And that those needs seem to be the precondition for experiencing the spiritual life. In fact, Jesus goes on to say right after this passage that if you want to experience the kingdom of God, you have to become like a child. You can't earn your way, grit your way, or claw your way into the spiritual life. You have to accept your need, which puts you in an open, receptive posture. And yet, how hard that is for so many of us. What I see right now as one of your pastors in the congregation is a great deal of need for healing, for rest, for comfort, for clarity. Many of us struggling with anxiety and depression, or struggling to support your children or parents dealing with the same. Many of us struggling with meaning in life and the overall life-work balance. Many of us struggling in relationships or with work that no longer seems to bring fulfillment or meaning. And many of us, yes, struggling with grief. All of us struggling to know how to live, what to do, what routines to reestablish or not, following the worst disruptions of the pandemic. And yet, rather than serving to bring us together, it appears to me that for many of us, it seems to isolate us even more. I'm curious if that's because we are all complicit in a culture that pretends that needs are a problem to be hidden, rather than the soil where grace takes root between us. Like so many of you, I have been working on my grief in the last many weeks, and one of the things that I've come across that has been really helpful is a podcast with Anderson Cooper about his own grief. Losing his father when he was 10, losing his brother to suicide when his brother was 23 and he was 21, and losing his mother more recently. A few weeks ago, Dr. B.J. Miller was on his show, a palliative care physician who also lost a sibling to suicide. And Anderson asked Dr. Miller what he would say to someone struggling with grief, I say to them, welcome to being a human being. A full life includes sorrows. A full life includes things that you cannot change. And it's a lot to learn to sit with things that you cannot change in this life. He added that he would say to someone experiencing loss, this isn't a detour from life. This is life. So treat it accordingly. And life is hard sometimes, and you have a lot in common with everyone who has ever lived by virtue of having lost things. Anderson Cooper wondered how it is that loss and grief, and I would expand that to say more broadly, need itself, how it is that these are such universal experiences that nonetheless seem to leave us feeling more isolated and alone. And Dr. Miller mused that given that we are human beings that do share these experiences of loss and sorrow and need, maybe the separation and loneliness, maybe it is made up. Maybe, he said, the sense of loneliness and isolation is itself a bond. And if we can keep working on these lives that we have, maybe we can come to see the communal experience in this, because I think we hurt more than we need to. When we stigmatize our need for connection, for forgiveness, for grace itself, I think we threaten to destroy the communal experience of being human. We rob ourselves and others of the doorway to the kingdom of God, which, remember, Jesus explains is not some heaven light years away, as we sang in the opening hymn, but a reality among us and within us. A world that is accessible right here and now when we approach God and each other, not with the fantasy of a self-sufficient, needless life, but with our own wounds understood, revealed, our needs articulated, our regrets named and known. When I zoom out on this entire section of Luke's gospel, I can see how fearful people were about doing life correctly in a world that felt like it was coming apart, about striving to do what is expected of them correctly for fear they would not earn themselves the futures they had dreamed about in a world where so much was outside of their control. But Jesus turns their expectations on its head. There's no way, he says, for any of you to save yourselves. No way for you to perform your way into the spiritual life you imagine. No way for you to redeem your own losses. Quite the opposite. God is ready to meet you where you are. God is ready to work with you until you are whole. God is ready to stand with you in your brokenness and in mine until it is healed. Dr. Miller was right. Sometimes we hurt more than we need to. The kingdom of God is a beautiful place. Sometimes it's found within us. Often it is found between us. In that moment when you share the truth of your depression with a friend or a mental health professional. In that moment when you share your shame about that thing you did in the past, which you wished forever you could change, and hear the assurance of God's forgiveness. In that instant when you share the isolation of your grief with another and they with you, and you feel the connection that invariably comes. When you release that story that you are different from everyone else, better or worse, and marvel instead of the steady, reliable persistence of God's love that is alive in the world despite all of the wickedness, alive in other people despite the reality of sin and evil, alive in you.